Hello, welcome back to Healthy Happy Families with the Natural Parent. I'm Annaliese Jones, naturopath and medical herbalist, and today I want to carry on from a series, I suppose, that I started a few months ago about pregnancy. So we started with preconception, and if you haven't seen that and if that's relevant to you, I'd really recommend going onto the Natural Parents YouTube channel and searching for preconception, and you'll find my video on that. So go and check that out before you listen to this, because today we're going to talk about a couple of things that can be an issue in your first trimester. And actually, just on that, one of the really important things, and one of my bugbears actually, is to do with iron. And I've also talked about iron in pregnancy already. So if you haven't listened to that and you're pregnant, please listen to that, because it really is important to keep your iron optimal if you can during pregnancy. And sometimes what happens is we get tested and we're in a particular range, but it's not quite where we need it to be. So if you want to know any more about that, go and look for that video as well on the Natural Parents YouTube channel. Look for iron during pregnancy. And the other thing is to go and look at my motherhood guide, which you can get through my Instagram link in my profile. So in my motherhood guide, I have got lots of information about all the 4 trimesters, and there's a lot of in-depth information about your iron. Particularly, it's got a lot about reading your results and where it should be and where to get iron from your diet and things to avoid and all of that. So go and do that. But then the other thing that I want to talk about today is about thyroid health. So if you're pregnant, one of the things that will often be tested in your first prenatals, which is some blood tests that you get done either just before you're pregnant when you're trying, or perhaps in your first trimester, is thyroid. And they'll be testing generally just TSH. So TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone, and that gives us a little bit of a clue as to the health of your hormone and how much health of your thyroid and how much thyroid hormone your thyroid is actually producing. Now, pregnancy is a real challenge for our thyroid, just like it is for many systems in our body. And our thyroid, particularly for the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, is making all thyroid hormone for baby as well. So baby doesn't start making their own thyroid hormone until the second trimester. So in that first trimester, it's quite a lot for our body to take on. And one of the things that is very common, we don't know exactly why, but one of the things that's really common in pregnancy is that women will have issues either with Hashimoto's disease, which is underactive thyroid, or they'll have issues with Graves' disease, which is overactive thyroid. And sometimes if you're really lucky, you can swing between the two. So we don't know exactly why, but there's certainly some things that happen during pregnancy and also to our immune system that perhaps are causing these they're both autoimmune conditions in pregnancy, where our body starts to, for some reason, our immune system starts to attack our thyroid gland, which is just here. And so I just wanted to raise the issue and make sure that women are aware of it, that they're really good at advocating if they're having some symptoms that might point towards either of these issues, that they're really good at recognizing them and alerting their lead maternity carer about it. Because often what I see is that they don't, we sort of put the symptoms down to other issues, and you can see why when I talk a bit about them. So the thing about pregnancy is, now iodine obviously is a Ministry of Health recommendation and funded supplement in pregnancy, because we've been seeing such a widespread deficiency of that, not just in pregnant women, but we tend to notice it more in pregnant women, and it's very important for pregnancy and also for our offspring. And so a lot of women are taking iodine already. We've seen that sort of reduce down the rate of Hashimoto's, which is our underactive thyroid autoimmune condition, which you can get outside of pregnancy too, by the way. Same with Graves. They just seem to be more common during pregnancy for some women. So that's great. But with Graves' disease, unfortunately, taking iodine actually can promote that. So if you're a bit of a sitting duck because of health history, family health history, high stress, those sorts of things, already having an underlying issue with your thyroid perhaps, then taking the iodine in pregnancy can sometimes trigger that for some women. So what is Graves' disease? Graves' disease is the overactive version of thyroid autoimmunity. And what you'll start to notice are things like palpitations. So it's really common to have a lot of palpitations. It's common to have sort of like a heat intolerance as well. So where you just cannot stand being hot and suddenly your temperature is really, really risen. A little bit happens naturally, of course, when we have a baby on board, but it's really quite profound. And the other things that we'll start to notice are some diarrhea, perhaps, doesn't have to be all of these, and then quite often some anxiety as well. Sometimes there will be weight loss, which is quite unusual in pregnancy. So if we notice that, that could be a little red flag for Graves' disease as well. It happens to about 1 in 500 women. I actually think it's probably a bit more than that, but that's the statistics, the latest that we have. Obviously we want to reduce down our iodine in this situation. Iodine is very important for underactive thyroid. So in this situation, we would come off our iodine, we would come off any prenatals with iodine in them. So that would include the very popular Elevate, and we would come off our prescribed iodine from our lead maternity carer as well. There are some treatments for an overactive thyroid, but generally you wouldn't be treated if it's manageable. So if you can just monitor it through your pregnancy and make sure that you are, carefully monitoring it and perhaps doing some natural things that I'll talk about in a moment, a lot of women can manage to go through their pregnancy with Graves' disease and not have to take any medication to suppress their thyroid function. In really extreme cases of Graves' disease, the thyroid's actually removed or irradiated. So most women can avoid that though. Naturally what we do, there are a couple of herbs that are really fantastic in this situation. So seeing a herbalist would be highly recommended. The other thing we want to do is try and inhibit the uptake of iodine, and some of the family of foods that do that just naturally are the brassicas. So that's our broccolis, collie, Brussels sprouts, kale. It's also some of the legumes, so peanuts and other legumes, and also almonds as well. So they've been shown to actually reduce our uptake of iodine, which in this particular situation is good. It's not always good, but in this situation it is. So increasing those foods. The other thing that's really, really important is making sure that we're not having things like caffeine, obviously, too much sugar. And stress is another thing that seems to impact on our thyroid health in general, both for Hashis and also for Graves. So Hashimoto's is where we have an underactive thyroid. Now, so many people have underactive thyroid without having Hashimoto's disease, which is more of an autoimmune driven issue. But in pregnancy, what you'd notice is just extreme fatigue. So if you've ruled out iron, it could be to do with your thyroid. One thing I'd really recommend, just before I forget, is to make sure that in these situations you have your thyroid antibodies tested, not just your TSH. So you need to advocate for yourself around this. If it's not being further investigated and you still really think there's an issue with your thyroid and you haven't had your thyroid antibodies tested or your T3, T4, I'd really, really recommend advocating for that. So not just staying with TSH. If you want a bit more in-depth info around that, let me know. Or as I say, all of that's in my motherhood guide, which you can get through the profile in my IG account. The other thing that we do naturally is to decrease those foods I talked about before, like the brassicas and the legumes, because obviously of that impact they're having on iodine. We want to increase our iodine, of course. So there's a limit to how much we take. So you need to get advice around that. But we certainly don't stop taking iodine. And if we're not taking iodine further through the pregnancy, if you only took it preconceptionally, then I would say definitely get onto that. And we use a really beautiful herb that's quite easily available called ashwagandha, or Withania somnifera it's called. And that particular herb really, really helps the body to convert T4 to T3, which is the active form of thyroid hormone, which we are lacking when we have Hashimoto's and underactive thyroid. So that will help with some of those symptoms. So I really hope this has helped, and it's one of those things that during pregnancy you might never have had an issue with your thyroid. You may not have even ever had it tested, and suddenly it's one of those things that just in order to really have the best pregnancy possible, we want to make sure our thyroid is in really good health. And if you're having symptoms that you just know are not normal, please do reach out to your lead maternity carer and make sure that you advocate for yourself and that you look into your thyroid, because you never know, it could be an issue. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you really soon. Bye bye.